That okay.
How's New York anyway?
Yes, it's great.
Yeah,
It's yeah, well, it's New York.
it's different from where you were before, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah,
But you know, we Elizabeth and I have done urban living
yeah,
before. We lived in downtown San Jose, right in the middle of things. Now, obviously, you know, San Jose taking a hit in recent years. There's no place like this,
yeah,
obviously.
absolutely. Okay. Well, thanks for doing this. I just wanted really to get your thoughts on a couple of things.
Sure.
I guess the first one is I'm doing a piece on the royal family's basically interest in crop circles and UFOs. Could you just elaborate a little bit about what you know?
Sure. Well, there's no getting away from the fact that the royal family had, and maybe still has, though it depends on the personalities, a strong interest in UFOs, crop circles, and the unexplained. Now, this goes right back to Earl Mountbatten and Prince Philip,
Hmm.
and Prince Philip was introduced really to the subject of UFOs by his uncle Earl Mountbatten, took a strong interest in it, but because of the extreme sensitivities, had to hide his interest to some extent. I mean, you would think, well, the royals don't have to do anything, but yes, they did, and obviously the Queen was the ultimate authority here. And I'm not saying that she didn't have an interest, but with her, obviously, protocol came first, and just the
Hmm.
family.
Hmm.
And this was something that could have caused some blowback. So
Hmm.
it was made clear that this was an interest that had to be pursued really behind closed doors, and that's what happened. Even the Duke of Edinburgh had to basically conduct his research and investigations through the intermediary of one of his royal equerries,
Hmm.
but he did cause various witnesses to be brought in and interviewed. Had a huge library of books and
Hmm.
magazines. And yeah, actually one time it was revealed that the Queen and Prince Philip took a crop circle book. I think it was one of Colin Andrews' books
Right.
on as for their summer holidays on their official reading list, which then gets disclosed as a result of freedom of information. Not every bit of royal information does, but this was an interesting tidbit to be sure.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. I just wonder how much has been passed down to King Charles, whether he's interested at all. Are you aware of any interest?
Well, King Charles III has kept his own counsel on this. Obviously, his interests in things like environmental issues, sustainability, climate, um, multiculturalism, other religions is well known. So usually, particularly when he was Prince of Wales, he wore his heart on his sleeve, and of course his outspokenness on some of this got him into trouble. So my estimate is that maybe he doesn't have as strong an interest as his father did on this, because I think if he did, we would have heard about it. On the other hand, he was brought up in the obviously the tradition of discretion for the
Mm.
most part, and perhaps he's just keeping things very quiet on this one. It remains to be seen. I mean, I think we're still in the early days comparatively of his reign,
Mm.
and clearly at the moment he just wants to be, I think, a safe hand on the tiller. Obviously, the royal family has been through a lot of
Mm.
traumas and scandals, and for the time being, his policy is clearly to play things quietly, just get on with the job, a sort of early reign where just consolidating things is the watchword. So he's not going to suddenly start making wild statements about UFOs. He's probably not going to make wild statements about anything, but bubbling below the surface, who knows? He's his father's son, and very often, as most people know, fathers pass on interests, children pick up interests and like specialist subjects from their parents. So we'll see. And of course, we look as well at the next generation and indeed the generation after that. There is an immense archive of material somewhere, but as authors like Andrew Loney have found out with the Mountbatten diaries and such like, it's the devil's own business sometimes to winkle this out of the system. So we will have to wait and see. There are many more exemptions that apply to royal archives than, say, ordinary government archives in terms of exemptions to the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah. I did read somewhere, I don't know how true this is, that Prince Charles attended a UFO conference. Are you aware of this at all?
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. There are, of course, the stories that the Queen and Prince Philip one evening slipped into a performance of Warhorse, and with no real fanfare or anything, and suddenly there was a sort of gasps and murmurs as people recognized them and such like. But these things happen. I suspect a lot more people attend UFO conferences incognito than one would suspect. I did once, actually, when I was on the UFO desk. I slipped quietly into a conference and took notes and sent a report back and such like. I think news of that leaked out when we declassified and released some of the files, but you know, lots of people go to UFO conferences, so royals, it wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, thank you for that. Is there anything, say, King Charles was interested in, was kind of looking at the aspects of if disclosure was made or first contacts and his role as head of state, head of the Church of England, what could he do to help his followers, subjects?
Well, I think a couple of things. Firstly, talk behind the scenes clearly to leadership figures in the United States, whether it's you know, the president, or whether it's senior government, military, and intelligence community personnel. The king always has a sort of direct access hotline to the top people when he needs it or wants it, which is as you would expect it to be. So here is somebody who could lift up the phone and say, look here, what's going on in the United States. I've followed the story with interest about the NASA report, the reports from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the congressional hearings, the multiple UFO-related provisions in the defense bill. I want a full classified briefing, and I'm sure he would get one. But the other thing that he could do, which might be of more practical benefit in the United Kingdom, because I mean, you know, we don't need to kickstart this in the US; it's already started. So what we really need to do is get this going in the UK, and one way to do that would be to get Parliament engaged on this, and to get the sort of hearing in Parliament that we've seen in the US. And now the way to do that would be to get members of Parliament and peers to raise this by means of parliamentary questions, but also getting the Defense Committee to hold a hearing and essentially holding the Ministry of Defense to account. Now, not many people can do that, but I guarantee the king can. And if it had to be done by the sort of established route of maybe saying to the Secretary of State for Defense, look, I want you to do something, or a little bit more subversive, essentially inspiring some backbench MPs to raise this in sufficient numbers. I mean, how this all got started in the US was a small number of congressional representatives here and there started asking some questions. Hey, I've read in the New York Times that despite denying you had a program, that you had a program, and you've got some US Navy videos. Well, I want to know what's going on. and it built and built. And so the same can happen in the UK, but it starts with a single MP or peer, and then a second, and then a third. And one person who could absolutely start that process is, of course, His Majesty the King.
Brilliant. Okay, let's hope he does. I mean, that's interesting what he said about getting MPs. Why aren't they, leveling questions in Parliament about it? Is there more stigma over here still regarding UFOs, that an MP wouldn't want to jeopardize his or her career by talking about such woo-woo stuff? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes, but there's only stigma until there isn't. And somebody has to go first. And yes, it's a big, brave first step. And there's always the fear of ridicule. And you don't want to be the politician associated with flying saucers if that's the way it's spun. But look, politicians can be very astute at times. And it's very easy, I think, particularly if you've got royal support, either overt or covert, but it's very easy to frame your interest in this, if you're a parliamentarian, as an interest stemming from commitment to open government, concerns about defense and national security, or concerns about flight safety. And it's no surprise, or it shouldn't be, that that's exactly how politicians handled it in the US. They said, look, I'm coming to this because I'm concerned that there are things in our airspace performing speeds, maneuvers, and accelerations that we can't match. And I want to know, and I'm sure the aerospace community wants to know, and the aviation community, what's going on. That's a perfectly legitimate interest to have. In fact, it would be bizarre if you weren't interested and concerned, for example, about flight safety in a situation where we've got pilots and radar operators speaking out about this. So there are ways to do it, and there are ways of easing yourself into the subject through this framing it in terms of defense, national security, and flight safety. And by the way, I should pay tribute to Lord Black, who is perhaps one of the few parliamentarians who has asked questions about this on and off over the last 3 or 4 years. But it probably needs someone in the Commons as well as the Lords, and it probably needs 2 or 3 of them to go at once till you begin to build up a little bit of critical mass.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should be writing to our MPs. I think I will do that. Write to our MP, and
yes,
yeah.
But it's got to be done the right way. It's not what you can't just do is say, I want the government to take this seriously, because all that happens is the Ministry of Defense, which stopped investigating, so they say, at the end of 2009, and therefore has no real corporate memory on this, they'll just send a boilerplate reply saying, well, we looked at this for decades, never found anything of any defense significance in terms of a threat. We monitor the air defense region 24/7 through all the standard means like radar, and we're confident in all our processes. Well, that gives them an easy out. So that can't be the question or the concern. The question must be something like, given that the United States, which has conducted a more recent and thorough assessment of this than the United Kingdom, has declared this to be a national security threat, will the UK now hold a defense committee hearing on this subject? So it must be very specifically framed in terms of the Americans have just looked at this and engaged. It's no good the UK falling back on just historical actions, which are well out of date and out of step with the assessment of the dominant power in NATO. If the lead power in NATO says we've done a much more recent assessment than anyone else, more thorough, and we say we should be looking at this, then other countries should be doing so. And there are hints, of course, that through the mechanism of the Five Eyes, the intelligence sharing alliance between the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, there are in some indications that this is now happening, but all that's behind the scenes. We need something a little bit more open, and we need Parliament to step up.
Yeah, I mean, do you think we need some sort of movement in this country with serious academic scientists, people like yourself, but based in England, that are taking it serious people taking it seriously to push for some more
Yes,
information? Do you think that would help?
very much so. In the United States, we have arguably now one of the best known scientists in the world, Michio Kaku, advocating for this. We have another of the world's most famous scientists, Professor Avi Loeb at Harvard University, a world-renowned astrophysicist who leads the Galileo project. So absolutely, it's no good having a sort of university lecturer here and a scientist there. You need big guns on this, and you need a sort of critical mass of these people to build up. Galileo project is a case in point. Under the leadership of Avi Loeb, he now has a multidisciplinary group of scientists, but also non-scientists who are in the group in an advisory capacity. People like Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and I must say I'm actually in that group myself.
Yes.
And but you need something like that in the UK, and at the moment, frankly, it just isn't there.
It isn't there. Okay. Thank you for that. That's brilliant. My second question really is something a bit out there, really. I've come across this thing called Project Bluebeam. Is this just an internet conspiracy myth, or is this some top secret military project? Do we know?
Well, Project Bluebeam has been around for many years in terms of rumors circulating on the internet, and like all good conspiracy theories, it probably does have a few roots in reality, but probably not in the way that most people think. Simply put, Project Bluebeam is the idea that through a combination of maybe holographic projection technology, Hollywood special effects, and government or deep state spin and manipulation, you could create a false narrative. And the two examples that have been given are you could create basically a false flag alien invasion or a false flag second coming. And what this would then do, it would, rather like some people say, well, 9/11 led to the introduction of the Patriot Act, and big state, deep state coming in and maybe taking some rights and freedoms that we'd previously had and dressing this up in the flag and dressing it up as national interest and the need for unity and the very extreme circumstances which temporarily, of course, mitigate for the setting aside of normal checks and balances and processes. And so this is Project Bluebeam, the idea that you could fake an alien invasion, for example, and then use it to manipulate populations, and the New World Order takes over. I don't, frankly, believe it as told, but self-evidently all these things in their separate components do exist. There is holographic projection. We don't yet know how good it is because a lot of that's classified, but one hears rumors of the so-called ghost gun that can create very realistic portrayals of things. And of course, we all know spin exists in government. And of course, we've seen during COVID the way in which entire populations are manipulated, scared. I mean, fear is the key to a lot of this, of course. Entire populations who weren't really at any meaningful risk at all. It was only a very small group of people, of course, who were at risk of serious outcomes. The elderly, the immunocompromised, and the obese, and more often than not, people with all of those categories. And yet we were sold this kind of dishonest, everyone's at risk narrative, and the world went mad for 2 or 3 years. the people screaming at each other for not wearing cloth masks that we now know from the science had a statistically insignificant health care benefit. People were, arrested on park benches and on open beaches when we know lockdowns didn't work, and when we know that open transmission was never a thing. So in outdoor terms, casual outside transmission, never a thing. So look, if they can do that with something like a pandemic, which was hardly unexpected, we've had pandemics before, we had contingency plans for them. How might it apply to the subject of UFOs and extraterrestrials and alien invasions? So we know that separately all those components exist, governments manipulating people through fear and through creating a false narrative. But whether the actual Project Bluebeam false flag alien invasion is real or not, I'm a little more skeptical. But if COVID taught us anything, it should be, listen to official narratives, but don't blindly follow them and sleepwalk yourself into total compliance when frankly the science was never really there in the way that we were being told it was. So and whatever you do, don't suppress dissenting voices, because in these polarized times where if you look, for example, at what's going on in academia with some of the non-scientific narratives that are creeping in terms of, frankly, just ideology, it's never been so important to allow dissent and allow genuine diversity of opinion, not a slavish adherence to the sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion industry, but genuine equality, genuine diversity. When people have different opinions, listen to those opinions. Don't listen to the identity politics of who's telling the story. Listen to the story that's been told, and then fact check it. And I know that we've gone off topic, and yet, of course, we haven't.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, that's the thing for me. COVID was like, I've always been quite left-wing, liberal, and then suddenly we had all these illiberal laws, lack of freedom of speech. Like you say, dissenting voices were shut down. I'm no anti-vaxxer by any way, but we should question things. We weren't questioning it. The government was getting us in a state of fear, and we were being able to be controlled. And I guess that's the point regarding false flag operations, Project Bluebeam, is that COVID has shown that populations can be put in that fear state very quickly.
They can. I mean, if one looks back at the history of COVID, and my goodness, we should learn lessons from it and not just move along and say, okay, that was then, this is now. No, there must be genuine accountability for people who either got it totally wrong, but particularly people who misrepresented the situation, knew we were, Partygate's a case in point. The real story shouldn't have been a few people breaking the rules. The real people should have been that the best briefed people in the country knew that they were at virtually zero risk of anything more than a cold. But instead of targeting our resources and assistance on those people genuinely at risk, we went mad and shut down the world and crashed the economy and set civil liberties back a generation.
Still paying for it now, unfortunately. Okay, thanks, Nick. Just another last question, really. Obviously, you're one of the world's leading UFO experts. Have you ever considered that what we're seeing in the skies, what these credible witnesses like the pilots have given evidence to US Congress, is not physical? Is that possibly some sort of psychic or spiritual or something from another dimension? Have you ever considered those as possible theories?
Yes, certainly. One should never get wedded to a single point of view. And although the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the one that's most deeply embedded in people's consciousness when it comes to the non-conventional explanations for UFO/UAP, it's frankly, it's only one of a number of competing theories. interdimensional, time travelers from the future, demonic. One of the most interesting things in the June 25th, 2021 preliminary assessment of UAP published by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence was the statement that there's likely not a single neat solution to this mystery. Chances are there are a number of different things going on in parallel, and that may well be the case. So as crazy as it might sound to some, for example, there is, and of course this is in your film, there is a faction within particularly the US government, but I've seen it in the UK as well, who believe that UFOs are demonic. And they get this in a large part from a passage in the Bible, in the book of Ephesians, which talks about Satan in terms of being, quote, the prince of the power of the air, unquote. And this faction, through that and maybe some other things too, have convinced themselves that this or some of this may be demonic. And therefore they say that you shouldn't engage with it. You shouldn't study it because that feeds it energy. And so it's an interesting irony that some of the pushback to serious research and investigation of this in the US and the UK government didn't come from hard-nosed, science-minded skeptics who thought it was all a waste of time and money. It came from a believer faction, but just a different believer faction, a faction that felt it was demonic and that we shouldn't study it for the reasons I've just explained. And I happen to think they're wrong, but there's no getting away their influence. Lou Elizondo, who headed up the Pentagon's ATIP program, which came before Arrow and before the UAP task force, he said on one occasion he was trying to get a senior manager in the Pentagon to take this more seriously. The guy sort of batted him away and said, go read your Bible. Wow. That's the mindset that you're coming up against, a sort of fundamentalist Christian interpretation of this.
Wow. Okay. Thanks, Nick. That's enlightening, mind-blowing. So, okay, I appreciate your time. How's the football season for you, Ben?
How's what? Pardon me.
How's the football season going?
Oh, yes. Well, little wobble at the beginning, but Arsenal have found their footing, I think, and are putting a pretty good run of performances together. And then, of course, we saw Manchester City knocked off their perfect start last weekend by Wolves, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Not the result you would have expected or predicted, but great. It's thrown things wide open, and we'll see what happens. I mean, Arsenal were unfortunate to lose one of their new signings, Timber, who would have been, I think, a big force to be reckoned with at the back. But no one's irreplaceable, and clearly there's some restructuring, and it's going to be an exciting season. And of course, all the VAR is in everyone's crosshairs now. I loved that audio. I mean, it's nothing we can do. Nothing we can do.
Guys panicking, isn't it? You can tell the panic is like, we can't stop.
It's it's sad, but in one sense, VAR is no different from the old school refereeing. There are going to be mistakes, and some of them are going to be horrendous, game-changing mistakes. The only thing that you can really say is that statistically, over the course of a season, just because of the way it works, mistakes should even themselves out, and some mistakes will go against you and some go for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, you're never going to get rid of humans make errors, and that's human error. So
yeah,
it's good we still got the human element in sport, I think.
But the tech will get better and better, but you'll still, even with that, when some of the football laws require you to discern intention. Was it an intentional handball or foul, or was it an inadvertent? Was somebody genuinely going for the ball, or or were they playing the man? Well, you know, if it's reckless enough, it's a foul anyway. But let's not kid ourselves that it's all about the technicalities. Part of good refereeing is about judging intent, and I don't know that a machine will ever be able to do that.
No, let's hope not. Yeah. So you've got Contact in the Desert coming up, I see, as well, which should be nice.
Well, now it's interesting. I've been invited to Contact in the Desert, but I've not yet been able to accept because Contact in, pardon me, Ancient Aliens Live has first call on my services.
Fair enough.
And so I need to see whether they schedule more shows. We've already done 25 or 30, I think. We've got another 2025 scheduled for this autumn.
Any plans to come to the UK or with that?
Not at present. I was in the UK fairly recently, of course, for Awakening Expo 2023 in Manchester, and that was great. I mean, thousands of people there at the exhibition centre over the weekend. They might invite me back. On the other hand, they might switch things up a little and rotate the invitees so that different people come over. It's always, I think, conference organizers like to do that, and that's very understandable, so that people get to see people that they haven't seen before or haven't seen recently. So people like, you know, this year, I came over. People like Billy Carson came over, but next year, who knows? David Childress, William Henry, maybe Giorgio Tsoukalos will come back. He was at the Blackpool event, I think, the year before. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
All right, thanks, Nick.
But there's so much interest in this right now.
I know,
whether it's UFOs or the unexplained or mind, body, spirit, or whatever it is.
No, I'm just really happy how the film's gone as well, which is it's doing really well on Tubi in America. So
sure, it's generated a lot of interest, and I mean it's a very provocative title, of course.
Yeah, I mean we've done it on no budget, and I'm really proud of what we've done, really, because it's just me basically, and
yeah. Well, sometimes these things, you know, it's like Blair Witch Project came really from out of left field and became a sensation. So I think God versus Aliens could, you know, I mean, it's just such an amazing concept, but it hides a deeper truth about this, that obviously questions of religion and spirituality are inextricably bound with this.
Yeah, I mean,
whatever we're dealing with.
I mean, this next film that I'm doing, I'm trying to tie up the paranormal, quantum physics, UFOs, and try and see if we can tie it all together. So that's the plan. That we'll get there. Like all quests, it's doomed to fail, but it's an honorable mission, I think.
Yeah, well, if you can tie all that together in a theory of everything, then well, that really will be amazing.
All right. Well, thanks.
And it's certainly something that people should try. I mean, because the more you research this, I remember, look, it's not my field, but I remember a few years ago, Richard Dolan saying something like, the deeper I go into UFOs, the more I realize that I need to have some sort of understanding of the debate about consciousness.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's not a subject I've yet had time to read into, but clearly many people have.
Yeah, we are going into that. Yeah,
I mean there are the more you look, the more linkages you find. So it is all about finding those connections and joining the dots and seeing what part of it is connected to what other part, because that's sometimes what tells you something's important about all this.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I'm just asking the questions. I never pretend to have the answers. I think we should be asking questions and having a debate and talking about these things. That's all I want to do. I don't want to say this is what's happening. You know.
No, well, you don't, pun intended, want to be too preachy about this. You want to kickstart a conversation.
Absolutely, definitely. That's what I want to do. Anyway, thank you so much again for your time, and it's always great pleasure and honor speaking to you.
Okay.
Really,
Well,
really appreciate it,
great
Nick.
to talk to you. And when you edit and post or whatever you do,
Yeah,
send me
yeah, of
a
course.
link, and I'll
Put it out.
retweet, post it,
All right.
etc.
Thanks, Nick. Right, much appreciated.
Okay, good to talk to you, and have a
You
great rest
too.
of your
Well, yeah,
day.
best of luck as well. I saw the video with Elizabeth doing her interview about the being cancelled and stuff like that.
Oh,
It's pretty.
it's you just as you think it can't get any crazier, it
No,
does.
but
I
it's
mean, forensic science told that
mm,
you can no longer have a conversation about whether a skeleton is male or female because that's hate speech. I mean, you couldn't make it up.
crazy, because like the point made, the skeleton is physically male or female. It's nothing to do
Yeah,
with its brain. It's how it identifies anyway. You're never going to
yeah,
know that anyway, even if you want to do
and
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and in 10,000 years' time, when they dig you up,
Mm,
whether you were gay, straight, trans,
mm,
however you identified, your skeleton will either be a male or female, short of a tiny proportion of variations, which is actually pathology and not some sort of different category.
yeah, that's crazy. Anyway, send my regards to Elizabeth and hope she does okay with it all.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, she's relishing the fight. You don't mess with a feisty redhead.
That's a good point. My wife's a redhead too, so yeah, I understand. It's the Irish. Thanks, Nick. Anyway, take care.
Okay, have a great rest of your day. Bye now.
Bye.